seasonals, cot, fundamentals as well, mainly seasonals and cot from Ash. Ash, what's the market telling us this week? I can see we've got some cotton seasonals up there.
Yeah, well, I just want to encourage everybody to go back and watch Julian's piece again, because it's always difficult, I think, every week to kind of go and say, okay, what's the really important stuff here? You know, what should I really garner from this? But everything that Jill said this week, I just think is so poignant and so on the money that that I think we need to sit up and listen. I mean, I'm going to do a whole piece tomorrow in the show on a couple of gold stocks, because I think we need to be prepared for this stuff. And there is movement when we look at the stock market, individual companies. There is movement, and now we know about the what's happening in the gold chart, but now we can go and start look at some of the detail, and some of the detail is going to be some of those stocks. So go back and watch Julian's piece again, because this week particularly, it's always very, very poignant stuff, but this week particularly, from a personal level, Julian just hit the money every single time. The buttons were going off in my head with just about everything he said. So let's just strip down what the COT data is telling us, because the COT data is going to point us in more in more of a certain direction than others. It's going to be more pinpoint in certain aspects of what's happening than it is at others, because things will all move together ultimately, but they will move at different paces early on. So if we do have just a quick look at the gold market, on the COT data is not really there yet. You know, I'm interested in what where gold is right now. I think it's at a really useful level to start thinking about building positions. Same with silver. It's not there yet, but by the time this stuff catches up, because remember, we're almost a week behind every time we get this data, 3 or 4 days behind at least before we get the data. Then the moves may well have happened, but so we're still watching out for it. It's saying it could be a shade early. When we look at the seasonals say the same thing. It could be a shade early, but it does look like it bottoms out around about the middle of this week coming. So sometime around about this week, we may well see a low kind of created. We may have seen that low already, but we may see a low of the current trend, which is just started to push to the upside on some of the shorter term timeframes, the 4 hour and the daily, and then we see that bottom out and then really start to go. But the products that I want to draw everybody's attention to this week is the stock market, because the stock market is really starting to show signs of stress. Now, whether people go and put their money in gold is going to be the question. The other answer, of course, if you don't want to go and trade gold and go and buy gold stocks, is to start getting bearish on the stock market. And the stock market is at those levels where it is dangerously high. Again, really poignant piece on that Jules said about the stock market. Very, very high when it comes down to some of the metrics that we need to suggest that the bull run's going to continue. Those metrics are very weak. You know, consumer sentiment was a terrible number, and we had this rally in the stock market right towards the end of the session. But it was a bit of a shocker for me, considering that we had that CPI data, which was so high. You know, you've got people effectively paying more for their goods, and you've got a lack of confidence from people about what they're going to do about spending money. What that will tend to equal is less buying. Less buying means businesses don't make the money. Businesses don't make the money, stock markets come down, because people then start worrying about the fact that they're not going to get their dividend yield that they would have got before. You know, that's when earnings start. So that's when the stock markets start to get a bit flabby and overvalued. And look at the NASDAQ, very close to the 20% mark, 28% on the 36 month, 28% on the 18 month, 25% on the 6 month. So very close to the 20%, where it says the COT data is now in the extreme zone where the bears may well start to come into play. The S&P, even more interesting, 36% on the 36 month, but 0 on the 18 month and 0 on the 6 month. So the COT and the commercial traders are saying we're not interested in the S&P at these particular levels. Still relatively interested in the NASDAQ. Relative to the S&P, but still, you know, coming down. But when it comes down to the S&P, it looks like this is where the stock market may well find problems, and you're really trying to figure out, the S&P is made up by many of the stocks in the Nasdaq. You're really trying to figure out, will it be a tech story or will it be something else? What Jules is saying about Tesla, difficult one with Tesla, very, very difficult, because it's so volatile. But there are other performers, there are other companies in the Nasdaq that latterly in the earnings season just haven't performed. You know, we had some decent numbers from some of the big guns early on, but latterly in the with some of them, PayPal and Facebook and companies like that, they haven't performed in the way that that the expectation was built to produce. So let's have a look at the seasonals on the Nasdaq and the S&P, because this is where I'm drawing my eye. You know, these two particular areas. Dow a little bit different, 51% on the 36-month, 16% on the 18-month though, and 29% on the 6-month. Does suggest that the early kind of trend may well be running a bit hot, and we could start to see some profit taking here. S&P in November, pretty flat. You know, if we're looking at this, it's pretty flat until around about week 3. So towards the end of the month, yes, we may well see that rally if the seasonals are to play out. But what the COT data and the seasonals are kind of lining up is that there could be some profit taking in the next week or so. It may go deeper and it may last longer. And considering the metrics, it should. But the metrics don't always line up with what traders are doing. But it's certainly saying that that over the next week, maybe the next week and a half, S&P does not suggest that we should be jumping on board with the rally to the upside, with the move to the upside, and maybe even taking some short-term positions to the downside. Nasdaq, similar. Very flat during November. You can see that November starts here, but after the first few days, it gets pretty choppy until around about the end of week 2, the start of week 3, and then we do tend to see that rally come into play. So be very, very careful out there. But I would suggest going, overlaying again what Jules is saying. Gold, silver, really interesting for upside. Stocks, quite interesting for downside. And I think that those moves could be pretty swift. They may not turn it into a bear market, but I think that there could be some short-term opportunities that actually bring us to the downside in the next week.
Cheers, Ash. Thank you very much for that. Interesting to see what the numbers are bringing us all the time. Certainly, this is a fascinating market, isn't it? You know, traders sometimes don't like it when it goes sideways and don't like it when it moves. And really, there's some opportunity around right now. We should be enjoying every bit of it.
Absolutely, mate. And I suppose this is the thing. The sideways consolidations are where people get caught out the most, because they do continue to expect it to either trend in one direction and the other. And I guess that's the point with the S&P and the Nasdaq. The range is actually quite wide. It's quite a big range. So even though it comes down, which I suspect it probably will, even though it comes down, it doesn't necessarily mean that the market trend has turned. It just means that we go from the top of the range to the bottom of the range, which is pretty wide at the minute.
Yeah, and time for and then perhaps some seasonals to come in later in the month and see if they want to move back up again. Be interesting to see how it does.